Daniels, I have the warrant. It's approved.
This is a setup. You know it.
The charges are conspiracy and misconduct. You're suspended.
You'll regret this.
Save it for your hearing.
The wind swept down Oakage Avenue the way it always did on chilly autumn nights. Dry and sharp, it cut through the collar of anyone foolish enough to be out so late. The street lamps buzzed with that distinctive insect hum that old sodium bulbs give off before they die. A single cruiser idled in a gravel turnout. Its exhaust curled white against the black, its headlights were off, its parking lights glowed amber. Inside that cruiser, a man was hunting. He had been hunting for years, and tonight he believed he had finally caught something worth every ounce of the trouble. The badge is supposed to be a contract. It is supposed to be a quiet promise between the person who wears it and the people who do not, that the person with the gun and the uniform will use both of those things in the service of something larger than himself. That is the deal. That is the only deal. When the deal is kept, the streets stay quiet. When the deal is broken, the streets learn very quickly that a uniform can also be a weapon, and a badge can also be a shield for cruelty. Officer Bryce Caldwell broke that deal almost every shift he worked. He did not think of it that way, of course. Men like Caldwell rarely do. In his own story, he was the hero of every block he patrolled, the last honest cop in a city that did not appreciate him, the thin line between the good people of Cedar Hollow and whatever criminal element he had decided was trying to get in that week. In his own story, he was necessary. What he did not know, what he could not possibly have known as he sipped his cold coffee in that gravel turnout on a cold night, was that by morning he would be wearing handcuffs, that soon after his face would be the most watched face on 3 news networks, that months later a federal judge in a wood-paneled courtroom would hand down 12 years and strike the gavel so hard the sound would feel personal. And it was going to happen because of a woman in a gray hoodie, a woman who drove past his cruiser late that night on her way to buy a bottle of ibuprofen. Her name was Captain Maya Ellison. She had been in Cedar Hollow for a short while. Most of that time had been spent dragging cardboard boxes up a narrow flight of stairs into a third-floor walk-up that smelled like fresh paint and someone else's cat. The rest had been spent sitting on the floor of her new living room with a laptop balanced on her knees, trying to answer emails from the State Bureau with a headache that had started somewhere over Indiana and had not let up since. She had flown in from a deposition in another state, a deposition that had been the last loose end of the last case of her last assignment. Her old office was empty. Her old nameplate was in a box somewhere inside this very apartment. Early the next morning, she was scheduled to walk into the 52nd precinct of the Cedar Hollow Police Department and take command of 60 officers who, according to every piece of intelligence the Bureau had handed her, did not want her there. She had not asked for the 52nd. The 52nd had been assigned to her because nobody else wanted it either. Sometime earlier, the previous captain of the precinct had been quietly pushed into early retirement following a corruption probe that had gotten within inches of producing indictments before stalling out on a technicality. 4 officers had resigned, 2 more were still under internal review, the union had circled the wagons, the rank and file had closed ranks, and the city had spent months letting the precinct run itself under an acting commander who had neither the stomach nor the authority to change anything. Maya Ellison had been given a mandate: fix it or close it. She had chosen to arrive in Cedar Hollow a full day early, not because she wanted the extra sleep, not because she was eager to unpack. She had arrived a day early because every instinct she had developed in years of internal affairs work told her that the only way to understand a precinct was to see how it behaved when it did not know it was being watched. She wanted to drive her own streets before any officer on her roster had ever seen her face. She wanted to know what her people did when they thought nobody who mattered was looking. She had not expected the answer to arrive this quickly. The apartment was too small, too warm, and too new. The headache was the worst she had had in months. She stood up from the floor, closed the laptop, and rubbed her temples with the heels of her hands. There was a 24-hour pharmacy a short drive away on the other side of the neighborhood. Late at night, it was a quick errand. She pulled a gray hoodie over her head because the apartment was cold near the windows, and because she did not feel like putting on a proper coat. She grabbed the key to the rental car, picked up her wallet, and walked out the door. The wallet was not an ordinary wallet. Tucked behind her driver's license, pressed flat against the inner leather, was a silver shield engraved with the words Captain 52nd Precinct, State Police Bureau. She did not take it out, she did not flash it, she did not need to. The next morning the shield would be pinned to her uniform. Tonight it was just a piece of metal and a piece of leather, riding quietly in her back pocket. The rental car was not an ordinary rental car either. It looked like a standard black luxury sedan of the sort you could get from any airport kiosk, and that was the whole point. In reality, it had been leased to Maya Ellison by the Bureau's undercover fleet division, and it carried 360 degrees of high-definition camera coverage inside and out with audio, uploading every frame to a secure federal server in real time. She had been driving that car for almost a year. It had recorded her dry cleaner, her grocery store, her parents' driveway on Thanksgiving. It had also recorded the last 2 corrupt officers she had put in federal prison. She had no particular expectation that tonight's drive to the pharmacy would add anyone to that list. She backed out of the parking space and pointed the sedan toward the interstate side of the neighborhood. The streets of Cedar Hollow were very quiet at that hour. Leaves skittered across the asphalt. A neighbor's wind chime clinked somewhere behind a privacy fence. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing was supposed to happen, which was exactly the kind of neighborhood where, in Maya's experience, most of the worst things did. 3 blocks from the pharmacy, she drove past a gravel turnout behind a billboard for an injury lawyer, and she did not see the cruiser parked inside it. Bryce Caldwell saw her. Caldwell was 48. He had been on the job for years, all of them at the 52nd, none of them distinguished. He had taken the sergeant's exam twice and failed. He had applied for the detective track 3 times and been passed over. The department said it was because his complaint file was thick. He said it was because the department did not recognize real police work when it walked into the room. The truth, as is usually the truth with men like Caldwell, was somewhere in between, which meant it was not in his favor. He had a buzz cut that had been retreating up his skull for a decade. He wore his uniform tight. He kept his service weapon oiled and his cruiser spotless, because a man who cannot control his own career can at least control his equipment. He drank gas station coffee that had been sitting on a burner for hours and considered it a point of pride. He worked the overnight shift because overnights gave him autonomy, and autonomy was what Bryce Caldwell valued above almost everything else. On the day shift, there were sergeants and lieutenants and citizens calling in with phones in their hands. On overnights, there was him, a rookie he could bully, and a radio he could answer or ignore. Tonight's rookie was Officer Caleb Thornton. Thornton was 24, fresh out of the academy, and he still believed most of what they had taught him. He believed the oath, he believed the Constitution, he believed that the uniform meant something you had to earn every day, not something that got handed to you and then expanded to fit whatever you wanted it to cover. He had asked to ride with Caldwell because Caldwell had seniority, and Caldwell had, in theory, things to teach him. Weeks in, Thornton had learned 3 things. He had learned which stretches of Cedar Hollow Caldwell considered his personal territory. He had learned which calls Caldwell took seriously and which ones he let sit on the dispatcher's desk until someone else picked them up. And he had learned, most uncomfortably of all, that Caldwell had a small zippered pocket on the inside of his tactical vest that he patted occasionally when he thought no one was watching. Thornton had not yet asked what was in that pocket. He was afraid he already knew. The sedan rolled past the turnout doing exactly the speed limit. Caldwell's eyes tracked it the way a cat's eyes track a bird. "Look at that," he said. Thornton looked. He saw a black sedan. He saw a driver. He saw nothing that required looking. "Rental plates," Caldwell said. He tapped at the keyboard of the dash-mounted computer. Running the number came back clean. "Hertz out-of-state lease." "Okay," Thornton said, because that was the correct answer. When the plate came back clean, you thanked the dispatcher in your head and you let the car go on its way. Caldwell was already pulling out of the turnout. The cruiser's headlights swept briefly across the sedan's rear window. And in the moment of that sweep, Caldwell caught a glimpse of the driver. Hood up, sunglasses at night, which his brain registered as suspicious and not as any reasonable person might have registered as a woman with a migraine, dark skin, a woman. His brain completed the sentence for him before he had a conscious thought. A black woman in a hoodie driving a luxury rental alone late at night through Oakage. "That," he said, putting the cruiser in gear, "is a red flag." Thornton shifted in his seat. "Her plate came back clean, Bryce." "Her plate came back rented," Caldwell said. "Clean is not the same as clean. Let's see what she is up to." He pulled onto the road behind her and settled into the distance a patrol officer settles into when he intends to trail a car until it gives him something to work with. Not so close that he announced himself. Not so far that he lost her. Close enough to lean on her. Close enough to make her nervous. Maya Ellison was not nervous. Maya Ellison had made the cruiser the second Caldwell pulled out of the turnout. She had spent years investigating officers exactly like this one. She knew the angle of a tail. She knew the difference between a cop doing his job and a cop looking for a reason. She maintained the speed limit. She signaled each turn well before she made it. She came to a complete textbook 3-second stop at the intersection of Oakage and Sycamore. She did everything that was supposed to make a reasonable officer lose interest in her. Caldwell was not a reasonable officer. Her perfection infuriated him. He flipped on the light bar. Red and blue strobes threw themselves against the siding of the quiet houses on either side of the street. The sedan's brake lights came on immediately. Maya did not swerve. She did not slow down too fast. She tapped her blinker, glided to the curb, shifted the transmission into park, killed her engine, put her hands on top of the steering wheel at 10 and 2, and waited. Caldwell ran the plate a second time because he liked to be seen running it by his rookie. He unbuckled. He rested his right hand on the butt of his service weapon, a little theatrical flourish he used on every stop because he had learned years ago that a hand on a gun made civilians pliant. "Keep your eyes up," he said to Thornton. "Watch the passenger area. I do not want any surprises." "There is no passenger," Thornton said. "It is just her." "Watch the passenger area," Caldwell repeated. He got out of the cruiser. The cold slapped him. He walked up the side of the sedan with his mag light already on, the beam of it too bright, too close, aimed deliberately at the driver's face. It was an intimidation tactic. He knew it was an intimidation tactic. He used it on everyone. Maya did not flinch. Her hands stayed at 10 and 2. Her eyes behind the sunglasses tracked him calmly in the side mirror. By the time he reached her window, the trap had already started to close. He just did not know it yet. License, registration, proof of insurance. No greeting, no good evening, no identification of himself, no stated reason for the stop. Caldwell's voice came through the open window flat and loud, the way he liked to come in on a stop, establishing in the first few seconds that he was going to be the one asking questions and she was going to be the one answering them. Maya slid the sunglasses off her face and set them on the dashboard. She reached across to the glove box with slow, visible movements, the kind of movements a person makes when she has seen what happens to people who move quickly in front of officers like this one. She pulled the rental agreement out first, then her insurance card, then her driver's license from her wallet. She did not pull out the silver shield that was sitting behind her license. She handed the 3 documents through the window. Caldwell took them without thanks. He did not look at her. He looked at the documents. He looked at the rental agreement the longest, his lips moving slightly as he read the lease terms. The agreement was in her legal name. The license was in her legal name. Everything matched. Everything was current. Everything was boringly, unambiguously in order. "May I ask why I was stopped, officer?" Her voice was steady, even pleasant almost. It was the voice of someone who had been in this situation before and who had decided some years ago that she was never going to be the one who raised it first. Caldwell's jaw tightened. He did not like the voice. He did not like the voice for a very specific reason that he would not have admitted out loud. The voice did not sound afraid. It sounded educated. It sounded like it had been in rooms where his voice would not have been welcome. And it sounded like it knew that and it did not care. "You swerved across the double yellow back on Oakage." "I did not swerve, officer." "I am telling you, you swerved." "I understand. I would like it noted that I disagree." He clicked his mag light off, then he clicked it back on into her face. "Have you had anything to drink tonight?" "No, sir." "Any medication?" "Ibuprofen? I have not taken any yet. That is where I am going." "Where's home?" "Here. I moved in today." He looked at the address on her license. "Out of state." His lip curled. "Your license says different." "Yes, sir. I have not updated it yet. I have been in town a short while." "Convenient." She did not answer. She did not have to. A silence after a loaded word like convenient does more work than any sentence could. Thornton had come up behind Caldwell now, standing off the back corner of the sedan, his hand nowhere near his weapon, his body language apologetic in a way a uniform is not supposed to be. He glanced down at the paperwork Caldwell was holding. He could see plainly that everything in it was in order. "Bryce," he said quietly, "her papers are good. Shut it, Thornton." "Bryce, I said, shut it." Thornton shut it. He looked at Maya with something almost like an apology in his face. She met his eyes for exactly 1 second, long enough to register him, long enough to remember his features. Then her gaze went back to Caldwell and it stayed there. Across the street, behind a second-story window in a sage-green Victorian, Mr. Reginald Thorpe had woken up to the strobe of police lights on his bedroom ceiling. Mr. Reginald Thorpe was 71 years old. He had trouble sleeping anyway. He sat up, pulled on his glasses, crossed to the window, parted the curtain with one finger and saw a uniformed officer leaning into a sedan at the curb while a driver with her hands visible on the wheel looked straight ahead. Mr. Reginald Thorpe had spent decades as a postal carrier walking those streets. He knew every house, he knew every car that belonged on Oakage late at night and every car that did not. The sedan at the curb belonged to nobody he recognized, but the driver had her hands where she was supposed to have them. And the officer did not look like an officer who was having a reasonable conversation. Mr. Reginald Thorpe picked up his phone, he hit the camera app, he hit record, he did not film himself. He filmed through the gap in the curtain, steadying the phone against the window frame, the lens catching the cruiser, the sedan, the officer, and enough ambient audio through the single pane glass to register voices, if not specific words. A block down, Ms. Vanessa Landry had come around the corner on her nightly jog. Ms. Vanessa Landry was 36, a respiratory therapist at Cedar Hollow Memorial, and she ran late at night because long shifts left her no other time. She had one earbud in and one out, a habit her mother had drilled into her. She slowed when she saw the lights. She stopped when she saw the angle of the officer against the car. She moved into the shadow of a hedge, pulled her phone out, and began recording from across the street. Neither Mr. Reginald Thorpe nor Miss Vanessa Landry knew the other was there. Neither one knew the woman in the sedan. Both of them independently in the same few moments made the same decision any decent citizen makes when they see something that feels wrong. Caldwell never saw either of them. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Maya's eyes went a fraction colder. "Is there a reason, officer?" "I smell marijuana." It was a lie so naked that even Thornton flinched behind him. The air coming off the sedan smelled of nothing. No smoke, no perfume, no cologne, not even the stale new car smell of a rental that has been on the road for a while. The autumn street smelled of wet leaves and a neighbor's fireplace a few houses down. There was no marijuana anywhere within a quarter mile. Maya unbuckled her seatbelt. She stepped out of the car slowly, both hands visible, and closed the door behind her. She was taller than Caldwell expected, almost his height, and she stood the way a person stands who has spent a lifetime refusing to shrink for anyone. She crossed her arms once and then uncrossed them, resting her hands loosely at her sides because she knew crossed arms would be called resistance later in some reports she had not yet read but could already predict. Go stand by the trunk. She went and stood by the trunk. Caldwell leaned into her car. He made a show of it. He opened the center console and rifled through her sunglasses and her spare phone charger. He checked under the floor mats. He ran his hand down between the driver's seat and the transmission tunnel. He opened the glove box and pulled out the owner's manual, flipped through it, put it back upside down. He was performing a search because a performed search is how a man who has already decided what he is going to find justifies finding it. He found, of course, nothing. His frustration climbed. Maya had not broken. Thornton had not backed him. The car was clean. The driver was calm. Everything about the last few minutes had gone wrong in a way that was making the small, brittle thing inside Bryce Caldwell start to buzz. He turned his back to both Maya and Thornton. He reached into his tactical vest. His fingers closed on the zippered inside pocket. He eased it open. Inside was a small sealed plastic baggie no larger than a thumbnail containing roughly a gram of white powder. He had carried that baggie for years. He had replaced its contents twice. He had used variations of it in previous arrests, none of which had ever been successfully challenged in court, because the kind of people he used it on were the kind of people who pled out. He palmed the baggie. He bent down in the open driver's side door as if examining something under the seat. In one motion, he dropped the baggie onto the floorboard, and in the next motion, he picked it back up again, holding it up in the streetlight between his thumb and forefinger like a fisherman with a prize. Well, 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 he said, stepping back out of the car with a grin he could not quite keep off his face. Looks like somebody's not just a bad driver. He held the baggie up. Ms. Vanessa Landry across the street had the phone zoomed to the maximum her camera would allow. She did not have enough resolution to see the baggie clearly, but she had enough to see Caldwell stand up from the driver's seat holding something he had not walked in with. Mr. Reginald Thorpe, up in his window, had a better angle. His phone was steadier, braced against the frame. His lens caught the vest pocket being opened, the hand going in and the hand coming out with the baggie already in it. 2 seconds of footage that a forensic analyst would later be able to expand frame by frame into the cleanest planted evidence recording a federal prosecutor could ask for. Maya looked at the baggie, then she looked at Caldwell, then she looked at his name tag and his badge number. Officer Caldwell, badge number 4409, you are claiming you found that in my vehicle. That is exactly what I am claiming. I would like that noted on the record as well. You can note whatever you want. He pulled his handcuffs off his belt. Turn around, hands behind your back. She turned. She put her hands behind her back. She did not argue. She did not protest. She did not scream. She allowed him to ratchet the steel closed around her wrists. And in that moment she made a decision that she had been moving toward all night, but had not quite committed to until the metal clicked. She was going to let him do every single thing he was going to do. She was going to let him write the report. She was going to let him book her. She was going to let him put her in the cell. She was going to let the lie travel all the way up the paperwork pipeline until it reached the desk of the captain of the 52nd Precinct, which was currently empty because in the morning the captain of the 52nd Precinct was going to walk in and read that report herself. You have the right to remain silent. She did not speak. She had already been silent for most of the conversation. He marched her to the rear of the cruiser. He put one hand on her head and guided her into the back seat with more force than was required. A little shove, a little flex, a little show of dominance for the benefit of the rookie. He slammed the door. As the door closed, Maya caught Thornton's eyes one more time through the cruiser's window. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Her look said, "You saw what he did." And Thornton's look, for the first time all night, said, "I know." Caldwell climbed back into the driver's seat. He slammed his own door. "See that, rookie?" he said, putting the cruiser in gear. "That is how you trust your gut." Thornton did not answer. "I asked you a question." "Yeah," Thornton said. "I saw." Caldwell pulled away from the curb. Across the street, Mr. Reginald Thorpe stopped recording, sat down on the edge of his bed with the phone in his hand, and stared at it for a long time. He was still awake later. A block back, Ms. Vanessa Landry finished the run home, sat on her kitchen floor with a glass of water, uploaded the video to a cloud folder she shared with her sister in Columbus, and then, because something about what she had seen would not leave her, she uploaded it a second time to a Facebook group for the Oakage neighborhood. The caption went up soon after. It had comments quickly. The 52nd Precinct was a brutalist concrete slab on the east side of Cedar Hollow, 3 stories of sand-colored cinder block that had been new decades earlier and had not been loved since. The intake bay smelled the way every intake bay smells. Stale coffee, ammonia, cheap floor wax, and the ghost of every person who had ever sweated through a polyester uniform under fluorescent light. Caldwell brought Maya in through the back. He walked her through the sally port with his hand wrapped around her upper arm, squeezing a little harder than he needed to, steering her toward the booking desk the way a man steers a grocery cart with a broken wheel. He had switched into performance mode now. There were other officers in the booking room. Two uniforms at the far end filling out a DUI report, a plainclothes detective eating a donut at the coffee station, the desk sergeant parked behind the elevated counter with his reading glasses low on his nose. Caldwell wanted them all to see him. "Hey, Victor," he called out loud enough to bounce off the concrete. "Got you a live one." The desk sergeant looked up. His name was Sergeant Roland Hayes. He was 53, decades on the job, and he had the face of a man who has stopped being surprised by anything long ago. He chewed a toothpick. He took the arrest paperwork from Caldwell's outstretched hand. "What did you bring me?" "Rolling through Oakage late at night in a rented luxury. Smelled like a dispensary. Pitched a fit when I tried to talk to her. Tossed the car, ate a bowl of Coke under the driver's seat." Caldwell grinned. "Think she is royalty?" Maya said nothing. She stood where he had parked her 2 steps in front of the desk, her hands cuffed behind her back, her hoodie up. She looked at Hayes, she looked at the detective, she looked at the 2 officers at the far end of the room. She was cataloging every face that was in this room when Caldwell walked her in, because every one of those faces was going to be a witness to a chain of custody that was at this moment being built on a foundation of sand. "Name," Hayes said to her, not looking up from the keyboard. "Maya Ellison." "Address?" She gave her new Cedar Hollow address, not the one on the license, her actual one. "Date of birth?" She gave it. "Occupation?" There was a pause. She was allowed under every procedure the state recognized to decline to answer their question. She was also allowed to tell the literal truth, which was, State Police Bureau Captain, 52nd Precinct, Cedar Hollow Police Department, effective early the next morning. She did neither. "Civil servant," she said. Caldwell laughed. It was a real laugh from the gut, and it was loud. "Civil servant," he repeated, turning to the detective at the coffee station. "Looking for an audience. You stamp envelopes at the DMV, sweetheart, fold tax forms." Hayes looked up for the first time. He looked at Maya. He looked at her for a beat longer than he looked at most people who came through his desk. Something about her bothered him. He could not have said what. He took the toothpick out of his mouth, set it on the edge of his desk, and put it back in. "Put her in 3, Roland," Caldwell said. "Let her sit with the drunks till morning. She can call her civil servant friends from the payphone." Hayes hesitated. It was only a second. A second later, he typed personal effects. Caldwell emptied her pockets onto the counter. Phone, keys, hair tie, wallet. Hayes looked at the wallet. He picked it up. He flipped it open to the driver's license. Confirmed the name. Flipped it shut. He did not flip to the next pocket. If he had, he would have seen the silver shield behind it. He bagged the wallet. He sealed the bag. He tagged it. He slid it into the property locker. The shield went with it. In the corridor behind the booking desk, the heavy iron door of cell 3 groaned open. Caldwell walked her down the hall personally. He wanted to be the one who closed the door. He put his hand on the back of her neck and pushed her through the threshold harder than any procedure allowed. And when she stumbled slightly on the concrete, he laughed again. "Enjoy your stay, sweetheart. Get some sleep. You're going to need it." She turned to face him through the bars. Her voice was very soft. "Officer Caldwell," she said, "I will not be needing much sleep, but you are going to want to start calling every union rep you have ever met starting tonight." He rolled his eyes and walked away. His boots echoed down the concrete corridor until the sound faded, and the fluorescent hum of the cell took over. She walked to the concrete bench at the back of the cell. She sat down. She did not lean back. She did not close her eyes. She looked straight ahead at the opposite wall, and she began in her head to draft the first of the 3 letters she was going to write in the next 48 hours. The first letter was to the deputy chief. The second letter was to the United States Attorney's Office, Civil Rights Division, Columbus Field Office. The third letter was to the Union President. She had written versions of all 3 letters before. She had never written any of them about an officer who had framed her personally. This was going to be a new experience for her. And she found, sitting on the concrete bench under the fluorescent hum, that she was not as calm about it as she had trained herself to appear. Her hands, behind her back where the cuffs had been, were trembling faintly. Not from fear, not from cold, but from a slow-banked fury that had been building for hours and had not yet been given anywhere to go. She let the fury sit. She did not feed it. She did not fight it. She simply observed it the way she had learned to observe a hostile witness, and after a little while it settled to a low, even glow behind her sternum and stayed there, waiting to be useful. Back at his desk, Caldwell poured himself a fresh cup of coffee from the pot that had been brewed earlier. He sat down in front of his terminal. He cracked his knuckles. Then he wrote the report. It was a masterpiece of its kind, which is to say it was entirely fiction executed with the fluid confidence of a man who has written many reports like it before and has never been caught. He described a swerve across the double yellow line at the block of Oakage Avenue that had not occurred. He described the odor of burnt marijuana that had not existed. He described the driver's demeanor as agitated and non-compliant, which was a lie in both directions at once. He described the baggie of what field tested positive for cocaine as having been observed in plain view on the floorboard of the driver's seat, wedged against the center console, visible during a lawful search incident to probable cause. He printed the report, he signed it, he walked it down the hall and dropped it in the commanding officer's inbox. The commanding officer's office was dark. There was a nameplate on the desk that had been placed there that afternoon by the deputy chief's assistant, Captain M. Ellison. Caldwell did not look at the nameplate. He walked back to his desk, he sat down, he leaned back in his chair, he put his boots up on the corner of the desk, laced his fingers behind his head, and he closed his eyes for a moment because it had been a good night, and good nights deserved a little celebration. When he opened his eyes, he saw Thornton. Thornton was at his own desk across the aisle, staring at his screen. His screen was blank. He had not typed a word in some time. His face was gray. "Rookie," Caldwell said, "what's your problem?" "Nothing." "You got something to say?" "No." "Then say nothing." Thornton said nothing. He kept saying nothing for the next few hours. He sat at his desk, he stared at his screen, and every few minutes he glanced at the corridor that led to the cell block, and he wondered if he was going to be able to look at himself in the mirror the next morning. Later, his phone buzzed. It was his girlfriend checking in. He did not answer. Soon after, Ms. Vanessa Landry's video crossed many shares on the Oakage Neighborhood Facebook group. It got picked up by a police accountability subreddit that had hundreds of thousands of subscribers. A local news producer at the Cedar Hollow ABC affiliate who monitored that subreddit as part of his morning prep saw the video, watched it twice, and sent a link in a Slack message to his weekend reporter with the note, "This looks real. Want to dig on it in the morning." Mr. Reginald Thorpe, who had not gone back to sleep, opened his laptop, logged into the email account he used for church business, and forwarded his own copy of the video, the cleaner one, with the clearer angle on Caldwell's vest pocket, to an email address he had held onto for years without ever using. The address belonged to a former parishioner of his who had moved to Columbus and become a civil rights attorney. Mr. Reginald Thorpe wrote 2 sentences of context. He hit send. He finally went back to bed later. In cell 3, Maya Ellison closed her eyes for the first time all night, not to sleep, but to run through one more time the list of things that were about to happen in the next few hours and the order in which she was going to let them happen. She did not need a phone call. She did not need a lawyer. She did not need to flash a shield. She needed Bryce Caldwell to commit in writing to every single lie he had told her, so that when the trap closed, it would close on all of them at once. The trap was closing, she could feel it closing, and she was going to sit on this bench in this cell under this hum for another few hours because patience in a case like this one was not a virtue, it was the weapon. Dawn came to Cedar Hollow slowly. The 52nd Precinct did not notice. The 52nd Precinct ran on fluorescent light regardless of the sun, but in the world outside its cinder block walls, the city began to wake, and with it 2 parallel mornings began to unfold. One inside the precinct where Bryce Caldwell was riding the last clean hour of his entire life, and one outside the precinct where a video of Bryce Caldwell's vest pocket was making its way one forward and one share at a time toward the people whose job it was to end careers like his. Early the next morning, the morning shift began to arrive. The precinct's briefing room was on the 2nd floor, a cramped, windowless rectangle with cinder block walls, a wooden podium at the front, rows of folding chairs, and a faint, permanent smell of old donuts and damp carpet. The overnight officers filtered in first, tired, sour, counting down to the end of their watch. The day shift came in behind them, coffee cups in their hands, the rookies nervous, the veterans already complaining. Caldwell arrived early, sometime before briefing. He had gone home. He had not slept, he had showered, he had put on a fresh uniform, and he had come back because on a good bust morning he liked to be in the room early, holding court, telling the story. He sat down in the 2nd row, he put his boots up on the back of the empty chair in front of him. He leaned over to the rookies filtering in around him, and he started telling the story. He told it well. He had told it twice already, once to his wife, once to himself in the mirror, and each time it had gotten a little cleaner. 2 rows behind him, Thornton sat staring at his notepad. He had not slept either. He had not eaten. His stomach felt like it was full of gravel. He could hear, through the buzz in his own ears, Caldwell's voice telling the story of a swerve that had never happened, a smell that had never existed, a baggie that had been in Caldwell's pocket for years, and every word Caldwell said made the gravel turn over. Later, Sergeant Roland Hayes came into the briefing room with a clipboard. Hayes ran intake. He did not usually attend the morning briefing, but today he needed to hand the overnight arrest manifests off to the day shift commander because the overnight had run long and the paperwork had not been processed in time. He stood near the back wall with his clipboard under his arm and waited. Soon after, the door at the front of the briefing room opened. It did not open the way it usually opened. The shift commander, Lieutenant Curtis Blake, came in first. That was normal. But behind Blake came a second man, and the second man was not normal. And the room noticed him before it even noticed Blake. The second man was Deputy Chief Raymond Voss. Voss was a legend in the Cedar Hollow Department, and he was a legend because he was a bastard. He had come up through internal affairs. He had broken 3 precincts before this one, and he did not appear at morning briefings unless someone was about to have their worst day in uniform. His face was pulled tight. His eyes were doing a slow horizontal sweep of the room, and his eyes were not friendly. 10 Hut. Blake said. The room stood, chairs scraped. Caldwell took his boots off the seat in front of him with a half-second delay because he wanted the room to know he was not impressed. At ease, take your seats. They sat. Voss stepped up to the podium. He gripped the edges of the wooden stand. I am here this morning, he said, for a specific reason. As all of you are aware, this precinct has operated for some time without a permanent captain. That ends today. The Bureau has assigned a new commanding officer. I was scheduled to introduce her at this briefing. He paused. She was scheduled to arrive at this precinct early this morning to review the overnight logs before I made the introduction. She has not arrived. Her phone is going to voicemail. Lieutenant Blake has reached her emergency contact at the State Bureau, and we have confirmed she landed in Cedar Hollow yesterday evening. The room was very quiet. If anyone in this room, Voss said, has heard from Captain Maya Ellison in the last few hours, I need to know about it now. 2 rows from the back, Caleb Thornton's pen slipped out of his fingers and hit the linoleum floor with a small, sharp click that the whole room heard. Every head in the briefing room turned for just a second to look at him. Thornton did not move. His face had gone the color of ash. His mouth was open. He was not breathing. In front of him, 2 rows up, Bryce Caldwell had also stopped moving. Something in his brain, some small reflexive animal thing that lived beneath his conscious arrogance, had just connected 2 words that did not belong together. Captain and Ellison. He heard the name in Voss's mouth. He heard it again in his own head. He saw at the same time the arrest report he had dropped into the commanding officer's inbox earlier. He saw the top line of that report, the name field, M. Ellison. His bladder loosened slightly. At the back of the room, Sergeant Roland Hayes had gone as still as a man standing in front of a rattlesnake. He was holding the clipboard of overnight manifests, the arrest report at the top of the clipboard, the one he had stamped and filed himself, the name on the top of that report. He could see it without looking at it. He had typed it himself. Hayes looked up. He looked at Voss. He looked at Caldwell. He looked at Thornton. He looked at the clipboard. He cleared his throat. Deputy Chief? His voice came out small. It was not a voice the room was used to hearing from Hayes, whose voice usually had the weight of a man who had outranked in spirit, if not in stripe, most of the people in his building. What is it, Hayes? Voss corrected himself. He had known Hayes for years. He was never wrong about names. The slip told the room something about the temperature in Voss's chest right now. Sir, Hayes walked up the aisle. His hands were shaking so hard the clipboard clipped once, twice against the metal clip. Sir, I think I know where the captain is. He handed Voss the clipboard. Voss took it. He adjusted his reading glasses. He read the top page. The briefing room, which had gone very quiet, went completely silent. You could hear the ballast of the fluorescent fixtures humming in the ceiling. Voss's expression did a slow, terrible walk from mild irritation through blank disbelief to something that was not an expression so much as a weather front. His jaw set. A vein in his temple jumped. He lowered the clipboard. He lifted his eyes. His eyes found Bryce Caldwell in the second row as precisely as a laser sight finds a target. Officer Caldwell. The voice was a whisper now. That was worse than shouting. Yes, sir. Did you make a narcotics arrest late last night on Oak Ridge Avenue, 1 Maya Ellison? Yes, Deputy Chief. Caldwell's voice tried to find its bravado and missed. Routine traffic stop, possession with intent. And did you verify the arrestee's identity beyond her driver's license? Sir, did you run her prints, Officer Caldwell? Did you pull her federal record? Did you check the State Bureau personnel database before you put her in a cell? Sir, that is not standard for a traffic. Did you? No, sir. Officer Caldwell? Voss's voice was still very quiet. You did not arrest a drug dealer last night. You arrested Captain Maya Ellison, your new commanding officer. The briefing room made a sound. It was not a sound of words. It was the sound 50 people make when they all inhale at once and none of them exhales. Chairs creaked. A cup of coffee tipped over on someone's lap. A rookie near the back said an obscenity out loud without realizing he had said it. Somebody laughed. A short, broken, disbelieving laugh, the kind that comes out before a person has decided whether what they just heard is real. Caldwell's face did a thing that faces do not usually do. The color went out of it from the top down, draining through his forehead, his cheeks, his jaw, leaving him the pale yellow of old paper. His mouth fell open. His boots, on the floor now, flattened. His hands, laced a moment ago behind his head, came down onto his thighs and stayed there like they were not sure what to do. That, he said, is impossible. Voss did not answer him. She was in a hoodie, Caldwell said. She was driving a rental. She did not identify herself. She should not have to identify herself, Voss said, to avoid being framed by her own officers. Lieutenant Blake, get the keys to the holding cells now. Blake moved. He moved faster than the room had ever seen Blake move. He left through the front door at nearly a run. Voss turned to Caldwell. Get up, officer. You are walking with me. Caldwell got up. His legs did not want to hold him. He held onto the seat in front of him for a second until he had them under control. Voss watched him do it and did not help him. Thornton got up without being told. He stood in the aisle. He did not look at Caldwell. He looked at Voss. Deputy Chief, sir, I need to say something. You are going to say it, Voss said, and you are going to say it in front of her. Walk. They walked. The march down the corridor from the briefing room to the holding cells was one of the longest walks any of them had ever taken. The corridor was bleak and gray, the floor was waxed linoleum, the walls were cinder block painted a shade of institutional green that had been out of fashion for decades. Voss led. Blake walked behind him. Behind Blake came Hayes with the clipboard. Behind Hayes came Caldwell. His legs lagged. Behind Caldwell, quietly with his hand loose at his side and his eyes very wide, came Thornton. The walk took some time. It felt to Bryce Caldwell like the longest walk of his life up to that point, and he was correct that it was, although he did not yet understand that his definition of longest walk was about to be revised upward for the next 12 years. At the door of cell 3, Blake fumbled 3 times with the iron key before he got it in the lock. His hands were shaking. He turned the key. The tumblers made a heavy falling sound. The door groaned open. Maya Ellison was sitting on the concrete bench exactly where she had been all night. She stood smoothly like a person getting out of a chair at a meeting, not like a person getting off the bench of a jail cell. She adjusted the cuffs of her gray hoodie. She ran one hand briefly through her hair. She looked, for a woman who had spent hours in a holding cell with a broken radiator and 2 drunks, impossibly composed. She stepped out of the cell. "Deputy Chief Voss," she said, "I apologize for missing the morning briefing. I was unavoidably detained." Voss's face did something complicated. It was the face of a man watching an airplane landing without landing gear, against all probability perfectly. "Captain Ellison, on behalf of the Cedar Hollow Police Department." "Let's not do this here, Raymond." "Yes, ma'am." She looked past him, past Blake, past Hayes. She looked at Bryce Caldwell. She did not speak to him yet. She just looked at him. And in that look, for the first time all night, Caldwell understood exactly how badly he had miscalculated. His knees did not buckle. His bladder did not fail. But somewhere in his chest, a small animal that had lived there for decades laid down and covered its eyes. Maya turned back to Voss. "My personal effects." "Yes, Captain." "My sidearm, my shield, my phone, and my wallet." "Yes, Captain." "Then I want every officer in this precinct in the bullpen in 10 minutes. No exceptions. Nobody leaves the building." "Yes, Captain." She stepped past them without touching any of them. She walked back down the corridor toward the property room, her hoodie still up, her hands still at her sides, and every officer she passed in that corridor stepped aside for her without being told. Caldwell did not move. He stood in front of the open cell door and looked at the concrete bench where moments earlier his new captain had been sitting. Behind him, Thornton finally spoke. He spoke so quietly that only Caldwell heard him. "She told you, Bryce?" "What?" "She told you were going to need a union rep." Caldwell did not answer. He could not have answered. Ahead of him down the corridor, the woman in the gray hoodie was reaching the property room, and the silver shield in her wallet was about to meet the light of day for the first time in hours. The bullpen of the 52nd Precinct held 60 desks, a wall of file cabinets, a coffee station nobody had cleaned in weeks, 2 bulletin boards layered over with outdated memos, and a large television bracketed to the wall that was usually tuned to local news on mute. 10 minutes after the cell door opened, every one of those 60 desks had a person standing at it. They stood at attention, not because anyone had ordered them to, but because when a person who has been locked in a cell walks into a room as the commanding officer, and when that commanding officer is carrying her own silver shield openly on her belt, and when she is followed by the deputy chief who has just personally ordered the assembly, nobody has to tell you to stand. Maya walked to the front of the bullpen. She had traded nothing else. She was still in the gray hoodie. She still had the jeans. She had not changed. She had not washed. She had not even finished the cup of water somebody had handed her on the way up. The only thing that had changed about her was the shield on her belt and the service weapon now holstered at her hip, and a small folded square of paper she was carrying loose in her left hand. The shield caught the overhead fluorescent light when she turned to face the room. "My name," she said, "is Captain Maya Ellison. As most of you became aware about some time ago, I am the new commanding officer of the 52nd Precinct as of early this morning. That is my name on the door of the office at the end of this hallway." She paused. She let the room look at her. "When I accepted command of this precinct," she said, "I was briefed extensively by the State Bureau and by the Internal Affairs Division of this department on the reputation of the 52nd. I was told there was a culture in this building, a culture of impunity, a culture in which certain officers had come to believe that the uniform was a private license rather than a public trust." She paced once slowly in front of the first row of desks. "I was told," she said, "that I should not expect cooperation when I arrived. I was told that information would be slow, that the blue wall would be high, that if I wanted to know what my precinct actually looked like, I would have to see it for myself." She stopped. "So I arrived in Cedar Hollow yesterday. I spent the day unpacking. Last night, late, I left my apartment to purchase over-the-counter medication at a 24-hour pharmacy on the edge of this precinct's patrol sector. I was driving a vehicle leased through the State Bureau's undercover fleet. I was wearing the clothes I am wearing now. I was alone." She lifted the folded square of paper in her left hand. "At the intersection of Oakage Avenue and Sycamore, I was stopped by Officer Bryce Caldwell, badge number 4409 of this precinct, riding with Officer Caleb Thornton, badge number 5112, a rookie under Officer Caldwell's training. Caldwell was in the third row. He had been steered there by Blake. He was not standing at attention anymore because his body would not quite do it. He was leaning just slightly against the front of his desk. His face was still the color of old paper. Sweat had started to bead at his collar. Officer Caldwell, Maya continued, cited me for a traffic violation that did not occur when I was polite and compliant. He claimed to smell marijuana, a substance which, as any person with a functioning sense of smell could have confirmed, was not present in my vehicle or anywhere near it. He ordered me out of the car. He conducted a search that yielded nothing. At that point, having found no justification for the stop, no basis for the search, and no evidence of any crime, Officer Caldwell reached into the inside pocket of his tactical vest, removed a small baggie of a white powdery substance, entered the driver compartment of my vehicle, dropped the baggie on the floorboard, and then, in a performance for his own partner's benefit, picked it up and announced that he had discovered it. She lifted the folded paper higher. "This," she said, "is the report Officer Caldwell filed earlier this morning. It was in my inbox when I arrived at this precinct. It describes a swerve that did not happen, an odor that did not exist, a search that was unlawful, and a discovery that was fabricated. It is signed. It is on the record. It is a felony." The room was making the silence that rooms make when everyone is holding their breath together. "Planting evidence," she said, "is the cardinal sin of this profession. Every person in this room knows that. Every person in this room took an oath that made that clear. I have seen the inside of this department for a short time. In those hours, I was targeted for the color of my skin, searched without cause, framed with narcotics, and locked in a cell in my own precinct. I was fed into a paperwork chain that depended at every single step on other officers looking the other way." She walked to the wall where the television was mounted. She pointed the remote. "What I am going to play for you now," she said, "is footage from the internal camera system of my vehicle." The vehicle was equipped with 360 degrees of high-definition audio and video coverage, uploading in real time to a secure federal server. Officer Caldwell was not aware of this, neither was anyone else. The television came to life. What the room saw next was, by general agreement afterward, the worst minutes of police footage anyone in the 52nd precinct had ever watched, and several of them had worked narcotics. The angle was a dashboard cam that had been supplemented by a second pinhole camera mounted in the ceiling console, giving the footage a wide shot and a tight shot simultaneously. The night vision was clean. The audio was clean. There was no ambiguity. The room watched Caldwell lean into the driver's seat. The room watched his right hand go into the inside of his tactical vest. The room watched his fingers emerge with something small and white pinched between them. The room watched him bend. The room watched the baggie leave his hand, settle on the floorboard, and be picked up again in a single motion of absurd amateur theater. Maya paused the video on the exact frame where the baggie left Caldwell's fingers. "There," she said. She turned off the monitor. She turned back to the room. "Official misconduct, deprivation of rights under color of law, fabrication of physical evidence, perjury. Those are the 4 federal charges. There will be a 5th before the indictment is filed, conspiracy, if anyone in the chain of custody covered for him." Her eyes moved slowly to Sergeant Roland Hayes. Hayes stood very still, then her eyes moved to Thornton. Thornton was standing at his own desk in the 4th row. He was not looking at Caldwell. He was looking at her. His face was wet. He had been crying quietly for most of her speech, and he had not bothered to wipe it. "Officer Thornton." "Yes, Captain?" "You were present for the entirety of last night's stop." "Yes, Captain." "I am giving you one opportunity in front of every officer in this building to tell me what you saw. I know what the video shows. I am asking what you saw with your own eyes, standing where you were standing." In front of Thornton, 2 rows forward, Caldwell finally moved. He turned his head slowly toward the rookie. His eyes were doing a thing that eyes do when a man has nothing left to bargain with but the fear he can still put in somebody else, the blue wall, years of it. Every meal, every shift, every moment of cover he had ever given a fellow officer. "Do not do this to me, kid. Do not do this to me." Thornton looked at Caldwell. Thornton looked at the television. Thornton looked at the captain. Thornton looked down at his own boots, and then he looked up again, and the last weeks of riding shotgun with Bryce Caldwell went through his head in a single fast, bitter pass. "I saw Officer Caldwell plant the narcotics, Captain," Thornton said. His voice shook, but every person in the room heard every word. There was no swerving. There was no odor of marijuana. The search was pretextual. He pulled the baggie from the inside pocket of his vest. I saw him do it. I was 3 feet away. I said nothing at the time. I should have said something at the time. I am saying it now. The wall broke. You could almost hear it break. Decades of precinct tradition, years of Bryce Caldwell's personal arrangement with it, all of it going in a single sentence from a fresh rookie. Caldwell came off the desk. He came off the desk the way a man comes off a desk when he has lost everything else he has and only has his fists left to lose. And he came across the aisle at Thornton with his hands out, and he got exactly a step and a half before 3 officers hit him from different angles at the same time. They put him down on the linoleum hard. His face bounced once. Somebody got a knee in his back. Somebody else got his left arm up behind him into a compliance hold. Easy, Maya said. Cuff him. Read him his rights. Thornton stepped forward. His hands, which had been shaking all morning, were steady. He took his own cuffs off his belt. He knelt beside the man who had taught him for weeks everything a police officer should never be, and he clicked the steel around Bryce Caldwell's wrists. Click, click. The same sound Caldwell had made hours earlier on a cold street under a street light on a woman he had never bothered to ask a question to. Maya walked over. She looked down at him. Officer Caldwell, she said, a civil servant is a person who serves the public, not a person who preys on the public. You are going to have 12 years minimum to understand the difference. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. She turned to Voss. Deputy Chief, there is a federal convoy in the parking lot. 2 DOJ Civil Rights Division attorneys and 6 FBI agents out of the Columbus field office. I requested them from the airport yesterday evening pending the outcome of my first patrol through this precinct. They have a warrant for Officer Caldwell. They also have a subpoena for his locker, his cruiser, his personal phone, and his desktop. Voss's face did not move, but something behind his eyes did. They are here now. They pulled in earlier. They have been waiting very politely. Jesus, Maya. Federal investigators do not mind waiting, Raymond. They get paid for it. She turned back to the bullpen. This precinct, she said, is now a cooperating witness in a federal investigation. Every officer in this room is going to sit down at his or her desk. Every officer is going to stay where they are. Nobody leaves the building without my permission, Deputy Chief Voss's permission, or the permission of the special agent in charge who is about to walk through that door. Is that understood? 60 voices answered, yes, Captain, at slightly staggered intervals. She nodded once. She walked out of the bullpen to meet the federal convoy. On the television on the wall, which had gone back to local news on mute at some point, a morning anchor was reading a headline off a teleprompter. Above her shoulder, a graphic said, "Breaking viral video raises questions over Cedar Hollow traffic stop." The anchor's mouth was moving. The video playing behind her was Ms. Vanessa Landry's phone footage, slightly pixelated, time-stamped from the night before. Nobody in the bullpen noticed the television. They would notice it. All of them, within the hour. By later that day, the dashcam footage from Maya's rental had made its way from the State Bureau's servers to the Department of Justice to the Cedar Hollow ABC affiliate to every major network in the country. By afternoon, the ABC anchor was comparing the civilian footage, Mr. Reginald Thorpe's and Miss Vanessa Landry's, to the in-car footage frame for frame. By evening, the Cedar Hollow Police Union had issued a terse statement that it was monitoring the situation. Later, the union had withdrawn legal support for Officer Bryce Caldwell. By night, Caldwell's wife, who had seen the footage with her sister in the living room of their split level on the other side of town, was not answering his calls from the federal holding facility. By the next morning, Sergeant Roland Hayes had been placed on administrative suspension pending review of his failure to run a federal records check on a subject booked into his own precinct. By the end of that week, 2 other officers from the 52nd had been subpoenaed as federal witnesses, and both of them, faced with the prospect of their own indictment, had agreed to cooperate. Months after the traffic stop, the United States District Court for the Southern District of Ohio called the case of United States of America versus Bryce A. Caldwell. The trial took days. The government's star witness was Officer Caleb Thornton, who by then was no longer a rookie. He testified for hours. He did not flinch. He did not look at Caldwell once. He described in unsparing detail a training period in which his training officer had taught him by example every practice that eventually ended in cell 3 on a cold night. He described the drop piece. He described the speech about the blue wall. He described the night of the stop from the moment the sedan had rolled past the gravel turnout to the moment he had heard a silver shield clip onto a hoodie belt. The defense did not lay a glove on him. Later, the dashcam footage from Maya's rental was played for the jury uncut at full resolution with the audio at a volume you could feel in the wooden pew of the gallery. The jury watched it in complete silence. One juror put her hand over her mouth at the frame where the baggie left Caldwell's vest pocket. A second juror closed his eyes. The jury deliberated for some time. They came back with guilty verdicts on all 4 federal counts. The judge, a woman who had been on the bench for years and who had presided over many civil rights prosecutions of police officers across her career, sentenced Bryce Caldwell to 12 years in federal custody. He would serve his time in protective segregation, locked down 23 hours a day in a federal facility in West Virginia. He would not be eligible for parole for years. He would never wear a uniform again. He would never hold a law enforcement certification again. He would never carry a firearm legally again for the rest of his life. When the sentence came down, Caldwell did not cry. He just stood there. His lawyer's hand was on his elbow. His wife was not in the gallery. His union representative was not in the gallery. His partner Thornton was not in the gallery. Thornton was on patrol that morning back in Cedar Hollow in a new cruiser with a new training officer. Maya Ellison was in the gallery. She was in the second row in uniform, her silver shield visible on her belt. She did not smile when the sentence was read. She did not look at Caldwell. She looked at the federal judge and she nodded once, the small nod of a professional acknowledging another professional, and then she stood up and she walked out of the courtroom into the corridor and she went back to work. Months after the trial, the briefing room of the 52nd Precinct looked almost the same. The cinder block walls were the same. The folding chairs were the same. The wooden podium at the front of the room had been refinished because a rookie had spilled coffee on it earlier. But that was the only physical change. What had changed was not in the walls, it was in the room. Over the podium, a new framed notice had been mounted. It was not large, it was not ornate. It said in plain black type on white paper, "The Ellison Protocol, every stop recorded, every search logged. Every complaint reviewed by an independent board. Cedar Hollow PD, 52nd Precinct." Maya Ellison stood at the podium on a morning exactly 1 year after that cold night on Oak Ridge Avenue. Her shield was on her belt. Her uniform was pressed. She had 60 officers in the chairs in front of her, and 60 pairs of eyes were paying attention in a way that 60 pairs of eyes at the 52nd had never paid attention to anything a year earlier, not because they were afraid of her, but because they had slowly and together over many long months come to understand what she was doing, and they had come to want to be part of it. At the back of the room, a newly promoted Sergeant Caleb Thornton poured himself a cup of coffee. He caught her eye over the rim of the cup. He gave her a small, steady nod. She nodded back, the smallest nod in the world, and turned back to the briefing and began the morning the way she began every morning, with the list of overnight reports and the names of the people her officers had encountered, and the protocol by which in this precinct those encounters would be handled. Somewhere in a federal penitentiary in West Virginia, a man in a tan jumpsuit was sweeping a concrete floor in the common area of a protective segregation unit. He had lost weight, his buzz cut had gone white. He did not speak to the other inmates, and the other inmates did not speak to him. On the wall of the common room, a small television was playing the morning news on mute. He did not look at it. He had stopped looking at television months earlier. The streets of Cedar Hollow were quieter now, not because crime had gone away. Crime never goes away, but because on the east side of the city in the 52nd Precinct, the contract between the badge and the people it served had finally, after many years of being broken, been put back together. It would be broken again eventually, all contracts are, but it would not be broken by Bryce Caldwell, and it would not be broken easily. And in Oak Ridge, and on Sycamore, and in every neighborhood his cruiser had ever patrolled, people who had learned not to trust a pair of headlights in the rearview mirror were slowly beginning to learn to trust them again. A badge is a contract, not a crown. In the 52nd Precinct of the Cedar Hollow Police Department on the east side of the middle American city that nobody outside the Midwest had ever heard of, the contract at last was holding. If the story moved you, if you believe that justice belongs to everyone who wears the uniform and everyone who does not, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because patterns only change when people refuse to look away, and because the next Maya Ellison is out there right now quietly in a hoodie on her way to a pharmacy, and the next Bryce Caldwell is about to make the worst decision of his life.